John Keel is best known as the author of the book, The Mothman Prophecies, that eventually became a movie. The movie and the true story behind it is what today's video is about. The book was released in 1975 and the movie came out in 2002. And I remember when I saw it, it scared the crap out of me. John Keel was a ufologist and was responsible for popularizing the term Men in Black. Men in Black are supposed government agents that work to silence and harass anyone that sees a UFO. He was also a freelance journalist, and he would travel around the country interviewing people for different magazines and newspapers. One of his visits was pretty funny. It was to see 15-year-old Douglas Shelton and his cat, Thomas. Thomas had wings, or what looked like wings. What she really had was a condition that made it look like she had wings. Douglas found Thomas and gave her that name. She was actually a girl. Thomas became a local celebrity, and people were charged 10 cents to see her, and it was more if you wanted a picture. The wings eventually fell off, and that was it for Douglas's business. But while Keel was in town, he learned about the sightings of the creature that would soon become known as Mothman. And Mary Heyer worked for the local newspaper, and she was the first person to write about Mothman. Point Pleasant and surrounding areas were experiencing a lot of paranormal phenomena, so he actually visited the area multiple times to interview people there. People reported seeing very bright lights about 100 feet above the water, and if people got too close to the lights, they would get burns on their body. The eyes were the first to be affected. They experienced eye burn due to prolonged exposure to ultraviolet rays. Their eyes would be red, swollen, and itchy. Others reported black urine and that it was almost like their insides were microwaved from the radiation. John Keel would eventually be sent to Parkersburg, West Virginia for a very strange story. He went to interview a man named Woodrow Derenberger about a strange experience. This is his story. One evening on November the 2nd in 1966, Woodrow Derenberger, we'll call him Woody, he was driving along I-77 South in Parkersburg, West Virginia. It all began when a vehicle overtook his truck and it followed him really close. And as the car passed, he saw a UFO behind it. And it then swerved in front of his truck, it turned sideways, and it gradually slowed down, and then it stopped. Then a door opened and a strange man stepped out and walked over to his truck. Woody described the man as being close to 6 feet tall. He had an olive complexion and dark brown hair that was brushed back. He communicated telepathically, and he told Woody that his name was Cold. His mouth didn't move, yet he had a fixed smile on his face. Their conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and before he returned to his flying saucer, he said, "We will see you again." Woody's daughter said that when her father got home, he was white as a sheet and very, very scared. Several people reported seeing Woody talking to a man, and reports of strange lights at the same time and place also started to pour in. He was visited by Cold many times, and he or it would show up at Woody's front door. In the movie, Will Patton's character is named Gordon. He was loosely based on Woody, and he complains that someone keeps knocking on his door every night. Woody received strange phone calls and sometimes threats to stop talking about what he saw. And sometimes he just heard odd beeps or electronic hums, and sometimes it was just silence. The family changed their number to an unlisted one, but that did not stop the calls. Just 10 days after Woody's encounter, the Mothman would be seen for the very first time. John Keel was the first person to investigate the Mothman, and he believed that Cold and Mothman were somehow connected. While Keel was in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, he received calls from someone who called himself Indrid Cold, and this is also in the movie. The sighting that I'm going to talk about now is what caught John Keel's interest. On November the 15th in 1966, two young couples were driving around in a remote area that's north of Point Pleasant. It's called the TNT area. It's called that because during World War II, ammunition was made there. The explosives had to be stored in these igloos and hidden from above. The creature was sighted in other places in West Virginia and nearby states, but most of the sightings took place in this area. The couples that first saw Mothman were Linda and Roger Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette. They were driving around when they saw two large red eyes that reflected the light from the car's headlights, and they seemed to belong to a strange, somewhat human-looking creature. They said that the eyes were about 6 inches apart. It was about 6 or 7 feet tall, with wings folded against its back. It didn't run, it wobbled, and it couldn't keep its balance. That may sound funny, but I read an account that someone had, and they said it actually made it scarier. Linda said it had the body of a man, but with wings, and she could see muscles in its legs. It was half man, half monster. They were all very scared, so they quickly got out of there. But the true horror began when the Mothman spread its wings and followed them down Highway 62. They were going a little over 100 miles per hour, and it still kept up with them. They couldn't get away from it. They heard the wings hitting the top of the car, and it left scratch marks on Roger's truck. Once they reached the edge of Point Pleasant, they were finally able to get away from it, and they saw it fly off into a field. Once they got back in town, they told Deputy Halstead what happened. He didn't believe them at first, but he knew that they weren't liars. Plus, he saw how scared they were. They drove him out to the TNT area, and he shined a spotlight around the area. He didn't see anything. They were sitting in the truck when they saw shadows circling, and they saw a cloud of dust kick up nearby. The Millettes were too afraid to go back home, so they stayed with the Scarberries. I don't blame them. They had all of their lights on, and they stayed awake all night from fear. I cannot imagine how scared they had to be. The next morning, Linda Scarberry was rushed to the hospital by her father after experiencing a nervous breakdown. The sheriff also held a press conference that day to discuss what the couple saw, and around this time, the press gave Mothman his name. It was based off of the comic book character Batman. After their sighting, more and more people began reporting seeing similar things. News spread quickly, and large crowds gathered in the TNT area the very next night. People wanted to see the Mothman. The legacy of West Virginia's Mothman had begun, and the story even made its way to the troops in Vietnam. Linda Scarberry appeared on Monster Quest on the History Channel on February the 10th in 2010. She died the following March. She was 63. She saw Mothman a total of 19 times. She said that one night she saw it outside of her window, and she sensed a sadness and a curiosity emanating from it. The next night, Marcella Bennett, her brother, and his wife were bringing Marcella's 2-year-old daughter to visit relatives who lived near the TNT area. Marcella and her brother had read about the Mothman, and they thought that it would be fun to try to look for it. They quickly regretted that decision when they saw lights in the sky hovering above the trees. Her brother told her to look at the lights. She didn't want to. He said, "No, stop, you've got to look at this. This is not a plane." She ignored him and kept walking to the car, and she was carrying her daughter, and she then saw the Mothman out of the corner of her eye. The first thing that she saw was a man's legs covered with gray feathers. She didn't see its feet. She slowly pulled her eyes up and sees that its wings were drawn in towards its body, and its head was tilted sideways, and it was sunken into where its shoulders should be. Marcella described the creature as over 6 feet tall with feathers. It just looked like a giant bird, but yet a man, and it was standing with its shoulders arched and its neck down. The torso was like a human, but it didn't have arms, and the face was indistinguishable. When she turned around, she took a few steps towards the house before she fell on top of her daughter. But she was unable to get up. She said that she was in a trance. But once she could get up, as she started to run, she could hear its wings flapping, and its wings were said to protrude from its back like an angel's wings. Her face, her hands, and her knees were badly skinned up, and she was bleeding. They also decided to call the police. The Mothman was now on the porch, and it pushed on the door and was looking in the house, but by the time the police got there, it was gone. Marcella said that it was the most frightening experience of her life, and it's something that she felt uncomfortable talking about. She stopped driving at night and she couldn't sleep. She was hearing things and thought that it was right outside her house and that it was still after her. She sometimes felt like it was in the backseat of her car. She would hit the brakes and turn around and look behind her. Eventually, she had to get help to deal with her anxiety and her lack of sleep. She didn't want to tell the doctor what she saw, but he asked her if she was Marcella Bennett. He asked her if she was one of the people who saw the big bird in Point Pleasant. Her story was obviously in the newspaper, and she was also included in the book, The Mothman Prophecies. This creature would be seen throughout the next 13 months in Point Pleasant, and Mothman witnesses were also harassed by the men in black who wanted them to not talk about the creature. The strange sighting stopped once the Silver Bridge collapsed on December the 15th, 1967. The movie is called The Mothman Prophecies because John Keel received mysterious phone calls at his home in New York from mechanical sounding voices that predicted events that came true. As soon as he would get home, he would get frantic calls from Point Pleasant, so he would get in his car and drive over 8 hours back to Point Pleasant. In the movie, the Richard Gere character has a premonition that something bad is going to happen on the Ohio River. And in real life, John Keel was told that there would be a terrible accident on the Ohio River and that a lot of people were going to be killed. There were chemical factories along that river, and since the other premonitions came true, he was very, very worried about this one. There's a scene in the movie that always stands out to me, is when Richard Gere's character, John Klein, is talking to someone that has encountered Mothman in the past, and his name in the movie is Alexander Leak, and Leak is Keel spelled backwards. The conversation goes like this. John Klein says, "I think we can assume that these entities are more advanced than us. Why don't they just come right out and tell us what's on their minds?" Alexander Leak says, "You're more advanced than a cockroach. Have you ever tried explaining yourself to one of them?" The nocturnal butterfly. In ancient cultures, the moth represents a form of the psyche, or the soul immortality trapped in the hellish death realms. Mothman. Well, that's what the Ukrainians called it. Rough translation, of course. There were 100 sightings in Chernobyl when the nuclear pump went down. Galveston, 1969, just before the hurricane, they saw it. But seeing isn't always believing. If there was a car crash 10 blocks away, that window washer up there probably could see it. Now, that doesn't mean he's God or even smarter than we are, but from where he's sitting, he can see a little further down the road. John Keel had an experience that was similar to the phone conversation that John Klein had with Indrid Cold. But instead of hiding his watch and Indrid Cold tells you where it is, Keel asked where his lost stopwatch was. The voice told him exactly where it was. In the book, Keel talks about communicating with entities that predicted plane crashes that occurred right on schedule. In the movie, a day or so after hearing the voice, Gordon's character learns of a plane crash in which 99 people died. Mary Hyre, that I mentioned earlier, was often with John Keel during his Point Pleasant investigations, and she had a nightmare about a lot of people drowning in the river and that there were Christmas packages floating around them. Connie, in the movie, played by Laura Linney, describes a dream in which she's drowning in an ocean and she's surrounded by Christmas presents floating all around her. It was 10 days before Christmas, and on both sides of the bridge, the traffic lights had stopped working. They were stuck on red, so cars and trucks were backed up on the bridge. It was also around 5 p.m., rush hour, and a lot of people were out Christmas shopping and they were doing other holiday-related activities. So they were not aware of what was going on until they heard the sound. Some said that it sounded like a gunshot when the bridge collapsed. People that saw it collapse said that it felt like a deck of cards, and the entire 1,460-foot suspended portion of the bridge had collapsed into the river. When it collapsed, 37 vehicles were crossing the bridge, and 32 of those fell with the bridge. 46 lives were lost that day. 2 were never found, and several were seriously injured. Lives were changed forever that day, and it's still hard for many to talk about. Some were saved from drowning by emergency workers, and witnesses saw vehicles floating downstream while people were inside and they were beating on the windows trying to get out. William Needham, a truck driver from Kernersville, North Carolina, barely got out alive. He was driving across the bridge when it collapsed. His team driving partner was asleep in the back of the truck, and he was strapped in for safety. One man lost his wife and his daughter. Pretty much everyone in town knew someone that was injured or that died on the bridge. The bridge was also a major transportation route that connected Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio. Without the bridge, people couldn't get across the river. Think about yourself for a minute. What if you worked on the other side of the bridge? What if your family was on that side? What if your job was on that side? What would you do? Most people didn't think that the bridge could fall, but some did, and they thought about it whenever they crossed it. And rightfully so, because the bridge opened on Memorial Day in 1928, and it wasn't built for the heavy vehicles that would eventually travel across it. According to West Virginia's Department of Transportation, the original design called for conventional wire cables, but an I-bar chain design was bid as an alternate and was cheaper, so that one was the winning bid. Because there was no redundancy in the bridge's design, the failure of one component made the entire bridge fall. The collapse had people in fear all across the country. They were worried that other structures built around the same time could face the same fate. President Lyndon Baines Johnson even ordered a nationwide probe to determine the safety of all of our bridges. This disaster led to the creation of the National Bridge Inspection Standards that I'm sure has since saved lives. There hasn't been any photographic proof to support the existence of Mothman, but that doesn't stop people from trying. Like this picture taken in 2003. It's actually a piece of metal that tilted over and fell off. But by some, it's used as proof of the Mothman. As mentioned earlier, a creature was supposedly seen in Chernobyl before the meltdown. He was also supposedly seen in New York on 9/11, and some say that there were multiple sightings before the Minnesota bridge collapse. Many people believe the Mothman is an indicator of an impending disaster. The sightings seem to disappear after the disaster, which backs that theory for some. Some believe it's a thunderbird. In various Native American cultures, the thunderbird is a large bird that creates wind and thunder with its wings. Some professors said that the Mothman is really an owl, a large heron, or a sandhill crane. Some think it's a pterodactyl that somehow survived all of these years, or an alien or something from another dimension. Others think it's an angel, a demon, or the result of a blood curse placed on the town by Chief Cornstalk, who was murdered along with his son in the area. And that's a whole different story. If you're interested in that, just type in Chief Cornstalk curse. I remember seeing a documentary where a man said that when he prayed to Jesus, the Mothman disappeared from view. Whatever it is, a sense of pure evil comes over most that see its eyes. They also suffer from an extreme fear that can last for months or even years. Across the country, people are still reporting sightings, and I'll include a link to an article about a recent one in Chicago. So what do you think the Mothman is? I love talking to you in the comments, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And if you live there, how do you feel about Mothman, the Cornstalk curse, or the attention that the town gets? Let me know. I'll see you soon.